I left work early that day, my heart fluttering like a teenager's. It was our anniversary, and not just any date on the calendar. I wanted it to feel special. I made his favorite dinner, the roast that took hours but always made him smile. I opened our best wine, the one we kept for something meaningful, and I even polished the silverware he always said reminded him of his mother's house. The table looked perfect. Simple, warm, intimate, just like I hoped our night would be. I stood back, took it all in, and felt this quiet pride swell in my chest. As I lit the last candle, I heard the familiar buzz of my phone on the kitchen counter. I smiled, instantly. It had to be Daniel. I imagined his message. Maybe something silly and sweet, like, "I'm bringing dessert." And it's me. That was his kind of humor. My hands moved quickly, eager to open it. I wanted to feel his words before I even read them. But the second I saw the first line, my body stopped. Every muscle tensed. My eyes scanned the screen again, not because I didn't understand, but because I couldn't believe it. "Pack your things and leave the house. You're no longer useful to me. I'm coming home with my new wife." That's what he wrote, on our anniversary. My vision blurred, and I wasn't sure if I was shaking from shock or from the sting of betrayal that sliced through me like a knife. The room, our home, suddenly felt cold, unfamiliar. I stared at the candles, still flickering, as if mocking me. But then something shifted inside me. The tears didn't fall. Not yet. Instead, a stillness took over. A quiet, seething rage that spread like frost across my chest. I kept reading it, again and again, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less cruel, less final. But no. Each time it was the same dagger. "You're no longer useful to me." As if I were some appliance that stopped working. As if the years I poured into that marriage, into him, had an expiration date he got to stamp. I backed away from the table like it had betrayed me too, like every plate and fork was in on the joke. My knees buckled a little, but I stayed upright. I had to. Because if I let myself fall, I wasn't sure I'd get back up. I walked through the house in a daze, my hands brushing over the life we'd built. The couch we picked out after a dozen furniture stores, the painting from our trip to Santa Fe, the rug his mother gave us when we bought the place. Every corner held a memory. And now, all of it felt tainted, contaminated by his choice. I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror, the same one I'd checked earlier, fixing my lipstick like a fool. My face was pale now, my eyes dull. But behind them, something unfamiliar was starting to flicker. It wasn't sadness. Not anymore. It was colder than that. Sharper. Rage, yes, but something more calculated too. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry into a pillow or write some desperate letter asking why. No. If he thought he could throw me away like garbage and stroll in here with his shiny new wife, he was going to learn just how useful I could still be. Not to him. Not anymore. But to myself. And to whatever vengeance the universe had been holding in reserve for a moment just like this. I blew out the candles one by one, slowly, deliberately, like snuffing out the last illusions I had about us. Each tiny flame vanished with a hiss, and with it, any warmth I'd been holding on to. I picked up the wine bottle and poured myself a glass, not for celebration anymore, but for clarity. The bitterness on my tongue felt appropriate. I stood there in the silence, swirling the glass in my hand, watching the light catch the deep red. I wasn't going anywhere. That house was as much mine as the air in my lungs. No, more, because I built it. I bled for it. He thought I'd be gone before he even got back. That I'd vanish quietly, like a loyal little wife who knew her time was up. But what he didn't count on was me finding my spine the second he ripped my heart out. He'd underestimated me, not just as a woman, but as his woman. The one who stood by him through every failure, every foolish dream, every dark stretch of our lives. And now he wanted to replace me like I was just a worn-out chapter? No. This wasn't the end of my story. He just handed me the pen. I walked over to the window and looked out into the driveway, imagining him pulling in. Smug, entitled, hand in hand with her. Did he think I'd crumble? That I'd leave the door unlocked and my dignity on the floor? I took a slow breath. I wasn't going to cry tonight. No, tonight I was going to plan. Because something inside me had shifted. Something unshakable. And while he was playing house with someone new, I was about to remind him exactly who built the one he's about to walk into. I couldn't sit still. My feet carried me from room to room, not really looking for anything, just tracing the edges of a life that suddenly didn't feel like mine. Every step echoed with memories I didn't ask for. The hallway where I used to wait for him to get home, still in my work clothes, still hopeful. The kitchen where I burned that awful lasagna our first year, and he laughed so hard he cried. The bedroom we painted together, arguing over paint swatches like it actually mattered. It all came flooding back, and yet, none of it felt real anymore. It felt stolen. I ran my hand along the banister, the same one I gripped when we finally got the keys. I remembered how small our savings were back then, how we scraped together the down payment with my inheritance and a little luck. He was between jobs, so I covered the bills for a while. Longer than I should have. But I didn't mind. I believed in us. I believed in him. God, I even put my own career on pause when his startup idea needed full-time attention. I became the steady one, the constant, the background music while he tried to find his melody. And now? He silenced me. Erased me. On our anniversary. I paused in front of the closet, his side still neat, just like he always kept it. I stared at his shirts, all those crisp button-downs I used to fold with care. I could still smell his cologne on the collars. It made me sick, but not weak. No, something was building inside me, something steadier than heartbreak. I wasn't about to pack his things, not because I wanted him here, but because he didn't get to write the ending. He may have chosen a new wife, but I was still the woman who built this house. And if he thought he could throw me out of it like I didn't matter, well, he had no idea who he married. I walked into the guest room next, the one we never quite finished. It still had boxes we said we'd unpack one day. Inside were pieces of me he never bothered to see. My writing notebooks, photos from my college days, the framed award I got at work that he didn't show up to see. I used to think he just forgot. But now I knew better. He didn't forget. He just didn't care. I lowered myself onto the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. How many pieces of myself had I boxed up for him? How many dreams had I shelved so his could shine? I remembered how he used to call me his rock, like it was a compliment. But rocks don't move. They don't grow. They just sit still, holding up everything else while they wear down from the weight. And I carried it all, didn't I? The bills, the moods, the disappointments. When his business failed, it was me who held his head while he cried. When he didn't get that job, it was my salary that kept us afloat. But now that his luck turned, so did his loyalty. How convenient. How perfectly timed. On the night I lit candles to celebrate us, he lit a match to burn it all down. I stood up. Enough mourning. I wasn't the one who should be grieving here. I hadn't betrayed anyone. I didn't run off into someone else's arms. I stayed. I sacrificed. I gave more than I got, and still, I was left behind. But no more. No more shrinking. No more loyalty to a man who cashed it in like a poker chip. I wouldn't leave this house like a discarded thing. I'd stay. And I'd take back every inch of space he took for granted. It was time to stop pacing. It was time to start planning. I moved back toward the dining room, the one I had set so carefully just hours earlier. The table still looked beautiful, untouched, waiting. But now it felt like a stage, and I was done playing the supporting role. I started clearing the plates, not with sadness, but with purpose. Each fork I gathered felt like a step forward. Each glass I rinsed felt like I was washing him out of my life, piece by piece. The ritual of it grounded me. It reminded me that I still had control, not over what he did, but over what came next. As I loaded the dishwasher, an idea started forming. At first, it was just a spark, barely there. But the more I thought about it, the brighter it burned. He wanted me out of this house? Fine. But he didn't realize something crucial, something I almost forgot myself. This house was mine. Not ours. Mine. Long before we were married, before I ever said I do, this place had been in my name, bought with my own money, my inheritance, my roots. And he was just a guest who overstayed. I dried my hands and looked around, not at what was lost, but at what was left. My name, my memories, my fire. I wasn't going anywhere, not until I made sure he felt the weight of what he tried to throw away. This wasn't about winning him back. It was about reclaiming what he tried to erase. And if he thought he could waltz through that front door with another woman on his arm, well, I had news for him. That door wouldn't even open. The next morning I brewed coffee not out of habit but strategy. I sat at the kitchen table, alone, calm, no tears in sight, and opened the old filing cabinet tucked in the hallway. It took me a minute to find the folder, the one I hadn't touched in years. The deed, my name, only mine. Signed and sealed 2 years before the wedding, bought with my parents' inheritance after they passed. He never contributed a cent to this home's purchase. I stared at the paperwork like it was a lifeline, and in many ways it was. I called the lawyer I hadn't spoken to since we closed on the house. She remembered me, listened carefully as I laid it all out, the text, the timing, the so-called new wife. I half expected her to react with disbelief, but instead, she sighed. "Seen it too many times," she said. "But Mary, you have the upper hand here. Legally, emotionally, financially. We just have to move fast." And just like that, I wasn't helpless anymore. I was a woman with options. And soon, I'd be a woman with paperwork in motion. I didn't stop there. I called a locksmith, asked for an emergency rekeying, then a moving company. Not for my things, for his. "Everything from the master bedroom and the closet on the left," I told them. "No need to be delicate." I made another call, to an old friend who worked in design. "You ever redecorate a house out of spite?" I asked. She laughed. "Only twice." My voice didn't shake once that day. I had a plan now. And when a woman like me has a plan, especially one she didn't ask to make, it's best you don't get in her way. By noon, the locks had been changed. Every doorknob, every entry point. The locksmith was quick and didn't ask questions, though he gave me a look, the kind that says I've seen this before. I offered him coffee. He nodded, polite. I think he understood more than he let on. After he left, I stood in the doorway for a long while, hand resting on the cool brass handle. It felt final, like drawing a line he wouldn't be able to cross again, not without a key. And trust me, he'd never get one of those again. The movers came right after. 2 men, efficient, quiet. I pointed to his side of the closet, the drawers that held his monogrammed socks, the shelf with his leather shaving kit. They packed it all with mechanical precision, not a moment wasted. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. Every item they removed felt like air returning to the room. Lighter. Freer. I even let them take the leather chair he loved, the one I never really liked. Funny how that worked out. I signed the receipt and waved goodbye like I was sending off a bad habit I'd finally quit. Then came the hardest part, walking through the empty spaces that once held his things. You'd think I'd feel sad, maybe nostalgic. But honestly, I felt clean, like someone had wiped the fog off the mirror and I could finally see myself again. Not the woman who waited up late. Not the one who made excuses when he forgot my birthday. The real me. The one who once bought this house with her own 2 hands and dreams too big to be shared with someone small. The woman he misjudged and was about to deeply regret crossing. By the time the sun began to set, I was done. The house was silent again, but not in the same way as before. This silence felt earned, intentional. I sat back at the dining table, the same table I'd once set for love, and laid out the documents my lawyer had sent over. Property confirmation, notice of intent to file for divorce, a restraining clause barring him from entering the premises without permission. I signed everything in long, steady strokes. No hesitation, no tremble. It was the most powerful I'd felt in years. I printed one final note, short, firm, perfectly worded. Trespassing is a crime. This property belongs to Mary. Call your lawyer, not your ex-wife. I folded it and taped it to the front gate, right where his smug little face would see it the second he arrived. I made sure it was level, made sure it couldn't be missed. And then I stepped back inside, locked the door, and stood there for a moment, just listening to the echo of my own heartbeat. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. Somewhere out there, he thought he was coming home, maybe even rehearsing what smug little joke he'd deliver when he opened the door with her on his arm. Maybe he thought I'd be gone, that I'd obediently vanished, like a chapter he could close. But what he didn't know was that he was no longer welcome. Not just in this house, in this story. And tomorrow, when he tried to step back into my life like it still belonged to him, he'd realize just how far I'd already written him out. The next morning, I made coffee the same way I always did. Except this time, I drank it from the living room window, in silence, in peace, watching the driveway like it was a stage. I didn't have to wait long. Around 10 a.m., his car pulled in, smooth and confident, like he still owned the world. And there he was, Daniel. Crisp polo shirt, smug expression, sunglasses perched like arrogance on his face. And beside him, holding his arm like she'd won some prize, was her. Tasha, the new wife. He stepped out first, already reaching for the gate code. I sipped my coffee. He pressed the button once, then again. I could see the confusion start to ripple across his face. He tried a few more times, tapping harder, then looked at her like maybe she was the problem. She tilted her head, clearly annoyed. I leaned slightly forward, just enough to see the moment his eyes found the paper, the notice. I imagined the words sinking in, each one like a punch to the gut. Trespassing. Property belongs to Mary. Call your lawyer. He read it twice, maybe 3 times, like he thought the words might magically change. And then came the eruption. He shouted my name, loud, sharp, performative. Tasha flinched. He marched up to the door like he still had the right, pounded on it like a child denied a toy. I didn't move, didn't blink. Let him rage. Let him pound. Let the neighbors look out their windows, their curtains barely drawn, curiosity painting their faces. I didn't care. Let him perform. This was his curtain call, and I was watching from the director's chair. He kept yelling, this time switching to pleading tones, like I'd accidentally locked him out of his own life. Mary, open the damn door. This is my house too. No, Daniel. It never was. Not on paper and not anymore in spirit. I didn't answer. I didn't even shift. Let him feel the weight of being ignored. Let him stew in the silence he thought I'd fill with apologies and second chances. Tasha stood a few steps behind him now, her arms crossed, trying to act unaffected, but her face said it all. She hadn't signed up for this. She glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with the growing audience. A few neighbors had stepped outside, pretending to check their mail or water their plants. But we all knew what they were really watching. The perfect little fantasy Daniel had crafted, shattered at the front gate. Tasha whispered something to him, probably asking why he didn't have a key, why the locks were changed, why the hell his name wasn't even on the property. He snapped at her. That got her attention. Her whole body stiffened like someone slapped her with reality. I watched her take a small step back, just one. But it was enough. Enough to tell me she saw through him now. Maybe not all the way, but just enough to realize she wasn't walking into the fairy tale she'd been promised. Daniel turned back toward the house, still shouting, still pounding, as if volume could rewrite ownership. I let the curtain fall softly back into place. I'd seen enough. Let them both stay out there and feel it. The cold, the rejection, the embarrassment, the beginning of their end. I walked away from the window, slow and steady, my mug still warm in my hand. There was no rush. I didn't need to see the rest, because I already knew how it would play out. Daniel would flail, then fume, then eventually fizzle into quiet defeat. He'd dig through his phone, maybe call a lawyer, maybe call me again. I already had him blocked. Every number, every channel. And if he tried from a new one, well, I knew how to silence him now. Not with shouting. With absence. That house had echoed with so many of his moods over the years. The sulking, the cold shoulders, the self-importance that walked louder than his feet. But now, it was peaceful. My peace. And I wasn't about to let a man, any man, shatter it again. Outside, he was still knocking, still trying to make the world bend to his will. But the only sound that mattered was the one inside me. Calm, clear, resolute. I had no more apologies left to give. Just boundaries, locked doors, and a front gate that wouldn't open for betrayal. I poured myself another cup of coffee, added a splash of cream. I didn't even flinch when he shouted one last time. I knew what that yell meant. It wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief. It was the sound of a man realizing he'd lost the upper hand, the home, and the woman who once would have forgiven everything. But not this time. This time he'd underestimated the silence. And it was that silence that told him, "You don't live here anymore." The first time I laughed again, really laughed, it was months later, sitting at that same dining table, now surrounded by women who'd known me before him, during him, and now, after. The wine flowed. The candles flickered for joy this time, not illusion. There were no place cards, no stiff expectations, just warmth, friendship, relief. And as we raised our glasses, I looked around and realized this wasn't a comeback. This was a resurrection, and I didn't owe it to anyone but myself. The divorce was finalized quietly. No courtroom drama, no final showdown. He signed because he had no leverage left. No claim, no story to spin. I'd made sure of that. My lawyer called it a clean break. I called it a damn miracle. He tried reaching out a few times before that. First with fake apologies, then threats, then desperation. But I didn't answer. Not once. Blocking him wasn't just digital. It was spiritual. Every ignored call, every unopened message was another stitch in the wound he gave me. And slowly, I healed. I changed the locks again, not out of fear, but as a ritual, a way of saying, this is mine now, all of it. New keys for a new chapter. I painted the bedroom a warm sage green, got rid of that awful leather chair, and bought a plush sofa I could sink into without thinking about compromise. Every corner of the house became mine in a way it never had been before. And every morning I woke up without him, I felt a little more like myself. Not the version he tolerated, the version I missed, the version I finally chose. Some days I still walked past the front gate and smiled at the memory of his face. That stunned, sputtering expression when he realized the locks had changed. But not out of bitterness. Not anymore. It was just clarity. Proof of how far I'd come. That moment used to replay in my head like a revenge anthem. Now? It was just a chapter. A necessary rupture that made space for everything that followed. Healing doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it tiptoes in through a morning breeze, or the way your shoulders stop tensing at every sound. I started doing the things I once put off for him. Pottery classes on Wednesday nights, solo brunches on Sundays with a book in hand, spontaneous road trips without explaining to anyone. I wore lipstick for the hell of it, cooked only when I wanted to, and took up space in my own life like I was finally allowed to breathe. And maybe, for the first time in decades, I actually was. The quiet no longer unnerved me. It comforted me. It whispered, "You made it." Every now and then I'd hear whispers around town. That he and Tasha didn't last, that they argued, that she left. Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it wasn't my business. I didn't need his suffering to validate my strength. I'd already reclaimed more than he ever took, my voice, my time, my dignity. And that was enough. More than enough. Because I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living, fully, deeply, and unapologetically for me. The table where it all began, the one I'd once set with trembling hands and hopeful eyes, had become my favorite place in the house. Not because of what it represented back then, but because of what I reclaimed around it. I hosted dinners there now, surrounded by laughter, by stories that had nothing to do with him. No candles for romance, just light, steady and warm. I didn't flinch at anniversaries anymore. They came and went like weather. And if they meant anything now, it was only this. I made it through. That night, as my friends toasted around me, I looked down at my glass and thought about all the versions of myself I'd had to leave behind. The naive newlywed, the quiet peacemaker, the woman who waited too long for someone to change. They were all gone, not forgotten, but gently released. In their place stood someone I hadn't known in years, someone strong, certain, whole. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't overthink it. I just smiled, lifted my glass, and said the only thing that felt true. To being useful. To myself.